What's up, everybody? It's Larry with Yunique Medical, and I'm here with my buddy Ryan Smith. Now, a lot of you may know him already from his association with TaylorMade Compounding, but today he is here representing his brand new venture called TRUAge Diagnostics. And I am really pumped to have this interview with him because this company is going to be massive. And I'm getting one of the first interviews here. He's going to be on all the cool podcasts, talking to all the famous people. And he's doing this with me now. This is like maybe a test run, but it's probably because him and I have been friends for a while. So I'm really excited to have you on, man. I'm very thankful for this opportunity. So I appreciate you on this.
No, thanks for having me. Obviously, we've been talking about this for a while now, and so
yes.
it's finally coming together, and I'm excited to finally talk about it.
Yeah, dude, I'm so excited for you on this. Now, as we get going, I said this to you before, you and I, we get a little hyped up. We get really excited when we're passionate about a subject, and then our mouths just start going so fast and people can't understand a word we're saying. And then they put in the comment section, what are you talking about? What are those letters? What are those words? So I'm going to try to keep my excitement subdued a little bit, although I'm really excited. And let's try to get this information out there and get people excited and get them pumped up for what we have going on here.
Definitely.
So let's start from the top. Tell me about TRUAge Diagnostics and how it kind of evolved and came about.
Yeah, so TRUAge Diagnostics really started. I would never expected to be in an epigenetic testing company. I never once imagined that. And it started a lot of what we were doing in the integrative health space with TaylorMade. I've heard about this thing of epigenetic testing and epigenetic aging for a long time, and almost 2 years. And the first times I heard about it, it was in the context of forensic testing, right? How to use people's DNA at the crime scene to see how old they are, right?
Right.
Or the second one I heard was for life insurance, right? How to, maybe use their genetic material, different than DNA. We can go into that later, but how to use their genetic material to show how long they might live. And that was more exciting, but it really didn't become real for me until this past September, whenever there was a study published by Dr. Greg Fahey and Dr. Horvath that showed that metformin, growth hormone, and DHEA could reduce the epigenetic aging rate. It was only 9 patients, but it was a sort of a proof of concept study that I was really excited about because I started thinking all of a sudden, hey, this integrative health space, you see every day that you're helping patients, right? You've seen the lives you've changed. But at the end of the day, it's been around for a long time. There's not a ton of data on it, right? The traditional, med schools don't teach what this is, and that's a shame because we know how many people it's helping. And so I thought immediately, hey, this is going to be a great resource to show that we are, reducing morbidity and mortality, because this metric, this epigenetic age metric, is probably the most highly correlated metric to morbidity and mortality. So it's essentially just one of the best measurements of health. And so that was when I got excited. I started to look into sort of all the people who were doing this, flew out to every company that was doing it, talked to all the experts. And, I was a little bit disappointed because everyone was sort of doing this in a very, a microscopic way. They were essentially just performing a test and weren't interested in gathering data to make this a form of diagnostic testing. And that was really what excited me. So what we did is we started raising money, and we're here today, obviously about to launch to offer people this idea of epigenetic aging or biological age, which is really, really cool because it's a great health metric, but it's also just a good idea to know where you're at. Are you healthy? Are you aging well? Those things to extend your lifespan.
Okay, so let's kind of dial it back a second and let's talk about what is epigenetics, and then how is that different from regular genetics? A lot of people know about 24andMe and some ancestral stuff. Maybe they know about genetic SNPs and methylation and MTHFR, but how is epigenetics different from regular genetics?
Sure. Yeah. So that's a great question, and, epi, usually being above the genome, right? So these are the changes that happen beyond just your genes. The example I always use, and you'll probably hear it a couple times, is, you can look at a light bulb, right? You can see how a light bulb is constructed. You can see how it's engineered, but you don't know if it's on or off, right? Until you look at a different metric, which is it doesn't emit light. And that's what sort of we're doing. We're measuring if the genes are on or off. Methylation is actually what we're measuring. And it happens at very precise locations on the DNA, what they call CPG sites. And whenever they're methylated, methylation is usually an inactivation of that particular gene. But there's so many different spots, 26 million spots of methylation on your DNA, and they can change at any point, right? So this is not, this is not a one-time test like 23andMe. This is something that you take maybe every year, every 6 months to see, hey, how am I doing, right? And we can predict things like cardiovascular risk. We can predict things like your telomere length. We can predict things like when you're going to die. All these really cool metrics with really, really high levels of statistical probability. Dr. Horvath, who's probably going to win a Nobel Prize, he on all this stuff, he created sort of some of the original tests, and he generally says that it's more likely that the Earth is hit by an asteroid and everyone dies than my test is wrong. And so that's what we're talking about when we talk about this, high level of statistical accuracy. And this is just, the beginning of a wide diagnostic method. But epigenetics just generally are all those changes which happens to above your DNA, sort of how it's actually used and transcribed, and how you take that information and put it into the physical actions your body does on a daily basis.
That's awesome, man. That's a good metric to test, because we all know that we're built based on genetics. We got it from our mom and our dad, but everybody, I would say past 5 or more years, everybody's been focused on what are your genes, and they weren't testing, or they didn't have the testing to figure out whether those genes are typically on or off and which ones are affecting what. So sometimes the genetics of just your blueprint doesn't make up everything. And that's why I really like the epigenome and how to, leverage this type of testing to augment, therapy. So you mentioned it, a little bit ago. So there's a chronological age, like my age, versus a biological age. And that's kind of what you're measuring on the epigenome. So what's the difference between the two?
So obviously everyone's familiar with chronological age, right? We talked right up here, stop counting candles, right? That is not a good metric, because it really doesn't tell you anything, right? If you're looking at, age from a health metric, what you want to look is at how age is related to different outcomes. And people call that biological age, and people have been doing really crude measures of biological age for a long, long time. Even since the 50s, people have been saying, okay, we're going to take your age and subtract it by how many, cigarettes you smoke a day, right? Or something like that. And so really crude metrics to get to an endpoint, which is, how is your body functioning? Like, how old are you? Because, aging is defined as the sort of the progressive loss of function, right? And so, I could go into the whole thing about, is aging a disease, or not, but described as the progressive loss of function, which is not a good thing, right? And so this biological age is really a better measurement of how old your body is and how old, your sort of your cells are. It's a pretty complex measurement. I mean, it's, this one, it's very, very specific. As I mentioned, it's very unlikely to be wrong, but it's also very complicated. And so, you're using a lot of different points in the DNA to measure a lot of, sort of correlate to a lot of outcomes. All of this data has been really created, this testing method has been created by looking at computer learning systems. So this AI computer learning, sort of feeding it a lot of really good information and then letting it sort of spit out the 60 places on your DNA which are most correlated to your actual age and function. And you train that against chronological age, of course, which again is still loosely correlated to a lot of health outcomes.
Okay, so basically chronological age, this is my age, not much I can do about it. I have a birthday every year, and that's it. There's not much there's nothing we can do to manipulate that. Okay, that's time. So you're saying that with a biological age and with appropriate testing, there can be measures to maybe decrease that biological age. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, and that is entirely our goal. While a lot of people are looking at this for things like I said, like insurance, the reason we're interested in it is to help people live longer and better lives, and to validate interventions which are happening in this integrative space. Things like NAD therapy, things like growth hormone secretagogue therapy, right. Metformin, senolytics like rapamycin. All of these things have sort of shown to maybe have a life extension benefit, but now we can quantify that, right? We can actually say, reducing your age by this much in this dosing. And so we can sort of dial in all those question marks we had, like how often do you do it? Like, what's the most appropriate dose? What other biomarkers do you look at to make sure that you're making it personalized for personalized medicine? And so what this is becoming is, sort of like I said, a diagnostic tool to evaluate all of the things we do for our health, whether that be diet, whether that be the environments we're exposed to, whether that be nutrition. This can be a metric to sort of help us learn how all of those things affect our aging and therefore reduce our risk of disease.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a medical provider, that's the part I'm obviously most interested in. So let's talk about your testing specifically and your company specifically. So not there are other people in this space of testing epigenetics. Some of them use saliva, some of them use blood. There's like what, 4 published actual clocks out there. How is yours going to be different among these other companies and these other methods? Because everybody wants to obviously go, well, which one's the best? Which one's the best data?
Yeah.
We're looking for the best. So how is your company addressing that?
Yeah. So one of the ways that we wanted to be different is, as I mentioned, not just focusing on biological age. We realize that that's a great metric, but this testing is going to be a lot bigger than that, right? This is going to be one of those tests you take, twice yearly or every time you go into a practitioner's office. And the reason we think that is because, it's so specific for so many different outcomes. So you can, hopefully one day you'll be able to take a pinprick and see, how much exercise your patient's done, or, how much coffee or tea they drink. And some of those things already have data out there. And so it's going to be a bigger test, and we want to basically do more than just one test. And so one of the things that we do that is a little bit abnormal is the scale of which we test. There are 26 million spots that can be methylated on your DNA. Usually, testing, most of the other places out here are testing maybe 2,000. Probably the best I've seen is around 125,000 spots in the DNA. We are testing over 900,000. And so we are testing a very, very comprehensive segment. We do it via this sort of array-based technology that you see behind me. And so what happens is we're able to train all of our computer learning systems to find really better algorithms, right? So it's not just about how you look at the DNA, it's also about how you read it. And that's what the algorithms are for, is to sort of make sense of all the data that you're getting from the DNA. And whenever those algorithms are perfected, you get better predictive models, right? So we can say that, if you're methylated on spots 8, 5, and 6, we know for sure that, in the next 20 years, you won't develop cardiovascular disease or something like that. And so our algorithms are going to get better over time. We're not just offering algorithms on biological age. We offer, as I mentioned, some telomere estimators. We're working as well on death prediction models, and then also senescence burden models. And so we want this to be a test you take once a year to get a really good comprehensive look at all of those aging metrics, or the hallmarks of aging, right? Mitochondrial function,
Right.
telomere length, proteomics, right? We want to sort of correlate it to all of these outcomes. And so we're definitely taking the long-term approach and making sure that we give physicians and patients actionable information. That's the other big difference for us, is that, our report is comprehensive. It includes, ways that you might be able to change your diet, ways that you might be able to change your activity, ways that you might be able to change your medications or supplements, or even your environment. It even talks about things you can't change, like, the correlated factors of your parents, right? How did your parents' lives affect your DNA, which, is a really interesting thing. We know things like toxoplasmosis, even this past week, can be passed down epigenetically. We know that the age of your parents, can affect your epigenetics and how you transcribe certain genes. And so we give all of that information to the practitioner and the patient so that they can make useful, decisions about our data. And that's really where we try and be different as well.
Awesome, man. Yeah, and you sent over a diagram where it shows like most companies, it looked like the size of a pea, data points, and then what you guys are testing is like about the size of a grapefruit. So all the different points that you guys are looking at. So it's a much broader scale. And I'm really excited about the other components of testing that you're doing, with the senescence and the telomere length and the neurological stuff. The one that I probably won't do on myself is the when you're gonna die one. I may skip that one completely, just because I don't want to do that. But I think you answered my next question, which is for the people who are watching this. There's probably going to be a lot of medical providers watching this, but also lay people, our patients, our clients. So the question is, if they're watching this, why is this going to be something that they would want to know?
Yeah, so there was a presentation done by Dr. Morgan Levine, another one of the people who's really published a lot of these clocks and sort of a leader in the space. And one of the presentations she had showed that if you reduce the aging rate by 7 years, you can reduce the risk of morbidity and mortality in the entire population by 50%. And that is a crazy metric. Imagine that 50% of the people that are sick are no longer sick, or 50% of people you had that died in last year have another year to live, right? I mean, that's
Right.
a crazy metric that I think that any one of us would want for ourselves and our family members. And the other thing is, it's not just about living longer. You know, people always say, why do I want to live longer, right? I don't want to be old. But it's not just about that. It's about health span too, right? How you're living while you're alive, how you're functioning, right? And so people can use this as their one metric. You know, I wouldn't say you don't need to think about triglycerides or cholesterol or anything like that anymore. But this is a metric you can really focus on because it's so tightly correlated to those health outcomes that we're all trying to avoid. And so I think that this is, you know, sort of a check-in, right? It's like, why do you take your weight on the scale? You know, this is the same way, right? And it's basically just a snapshot of how well you're doing whenever you're trying to treat yourself as an aging individual, which we all are.
Absolutely. And you said it earlier, we're conceptually, some of us are thinking that aging is actually a disease process. I'm under that umbrella. So that's why this testing is, I find, very important. And talk about the way of the future. So if you're a provider in this space and you're not leveraging this kind of technology, you're kind of behind the ball, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be one of those things that, you know, I think we'll start to gain a lot of momentum. As I mentioned, I think it's going to win a Nobel Prize. And you know, we're already starting to see that discussion change on aging, like you mentioned, right? Like, you know, the World Health Organization now has an ICD-10 extension where they define diseases by aging processes, like, so diseases which are caused by age. And so we're starting to see a transition where people are starting to think that, that some things are changing. I mean, but even aging as considered as a disease was, you know, back in Roman times, there's some writings on some Roman playwrights discussing essentially that aging is a disease process. And as we sort of evolved to do things like antibiotics and treat sickness, this idea of preventative health, you know, got a little bit farther away, but I think it's coming back in storm now that we have this really cool tools like these personalized genetic medicine.
Man, I want to be on the cutting edge of everything. Same thing with the peptides. And we talked about maybe doing some studies together. Is that still on the table for us to collaborate on?
Oh, absolutely. You know, knowing sort of your specialty with hormone replacement pellets, right, and your whole protocol, I think that is just waiting to be elucidated, right? How does pelleting, even composed to traditional hormone replacement therapy with more stable blood levels, how does that affect the epigenetics, and what does that mean, right? That's one thing I've always wanted to you know, elucidate and do with you. We've also talked about senescence, right? How does things like the rapamycin or the dasatinib and quercetin sort of affect some of these aging markers? And so, yeah, definitely want to. Currently, we have a couple IRBs going. We have one looking at you know, the CJC epimorelin, which is a peptide, which is obviously very, very popular. And you know, in the study I mentioned with Dr. Fahey with the growth hormone, what they essentially showed was a proof of concept. One of the really important things as we age is immunosenescence, right? So as we get older, our immune system gets worse and worse and worse, and people are definitely, you know, sort of seeing that now with COVID, right, and who it's affecting and how it's affecting them. And so, you know, that's obviously something we want to avoid. But as we get older, you know, our cytotoxic T cells ratio to senescent cytotoxic T cells goes down. And one of the things that was actually proven in that Fahey study was that by activating the thymus by using growth hormone, you know, you can actually increase those production of the cytotoxic T cells, and that can reverse the epigenetic aging process, which makes you, you know, less likely to develop cancer. We talk about thymosin alpha 1 as well, that you and I both love. Thymosin alpha 1 is you know, a product which can also change that ratio. So we're doing some research there. We're even doing research on bariatric surgery and seeing how that affects epigenetic age and how weight loss associated with you know, surgery versus non-surgery is affecting. So we're trying to go down just about every path that you can and gather as much data so we can report back to our practitioners and our patients.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think we talked about, you know, I'll give you all the data on my wellness panels for my clients to start kind of correlating some of those metrics with the epigenetics, and then, you know, specific modalities and methods to see what's kind of most effective. So I'm really excited about that. And I think I'm going to be getting involved with some of those IRBs that you're talking about. So I'm excited to be a part of those, obviously. So let's get down to, we'll separate it into providers and let's separate it into a consumer. So if you're a consumer, how do you go about getting one of these tests?
So consumers can actually order the test from us directly, but you know, we actually encourage them to go to their doctor as well, because you know, their doctors are the ones who are going to be able to really talk about these results. And it unfortunately is a really still complicated process. Our report isn't the easiest to read. You know, it's a book. It's thick and it's technical, and so we definitely recommend viewing this through the lens of a healthcare provider, because they can sort of counsel you in this in terms of what are the biggest things to do. Right, we're going to give you a lot of recommendations. We're going to give you, like I said, diet, exercise, medications. We're going to give you sort of what all the data says, but seeing which one is makes more of a difference than the other is probably a decision you should have with your healthcare provider. And so we always recommend to go into the healthcare provider's office. Most of our practitioners are going to be stocking this in office. We have small test kits, which are rendered behind me, as you can see. You just have a small test kit. It's a lancet, which is a finger prick. So you just drop a few drops of blood in there, ship it back to us, and then we begin our genetic analysis.
Okay, awesome. So from a consumer perspective, what is the cost associated for them to do it?
Generally, it's going to be around $350 to $375 per test, and that's going to be probably once a year, maybe twice a year, if you really want to know about particular interventions and how you're doing. And the other good thing about that, though, is as we come up with more ways to read the DNA, more algorithms, for instance, we're going to be able to offer more tests for that same price, right? So we'll have more things available, such as the telomere test and some of those other tests I mentioned.
Yeah, really, really exciting stuff. And not to talk too much about peptides, because how we can get about that. So I see personally leveraging peptides in this space, particularly because they're cell signaling agents. And you've talked about growth hormone, and you've talked about thymic involution and aging, and how increasing thymus and T cells in the body can manipulate aging. Are you gonna try as a company, because there's a peptide side to you, obviously, in this. Are you going to try to link those two together in a lot of these studies?
We're going to try and link just about everything we can, and so definitely with the peptides. I think that they're a variable that a lot of our patient population is using, and they have a lot of, like I said, similar effects to the aging process. And so there will be a big part, but like I mentioned, we're going to be doing just about everything you can imagine, everything from maternal age to we're really looking at what they call this multi-omics platform. So multi-omics contain everything from your genetic material, right? Things like your 23andMe or your any type of full genomic sequencing. Then you really go to the epigenome, which is what we're handling. Then you go to proteomics, which is sort of how the proteins and peptides are made within your own body. And then you go to the metabolomics, which are all those other constituents, all those inner cellular signalers. And whenever we put all of those together, what it really allows us to do is really solve for X, right? It's almost like an algebra equation, because if we have all of the data, we can really link all of these different things to outcomes, and with really, really high specificity. And so we're trying to investigate all of those. So in addition to, interventions and lifestyles and socioeconomics, everything, but there's no denying that peptides will probably have a large part.
Yeah, man, I really feel that what you're on right here is going to be truly game changing. And I'm excited to be a part of it, and B, see it kind of roll out and start using it in clinical practice. So I'm very excited. So how can people sign up or follow you, or kind of see how things are going and get more information beyond what we just talked about?
So in about a week, we already have a blog on TRUAge, which is pretty cool to tell you a little bit more about the scientific information. But in about a week, we're going to be launching the ability to sign up for our email list, which will include blog articles, all the newest and greatest research. And I would highly recommend that. It's TRUDiagnostic.com. And again, we'd love to sort of start a community, because this is going to be a very big intervention. We'd love to sort of nurture it from the ground up. What I'd recommend is you're going to get a test kit here in about 2 days. I recommend that you and I maybe do it together. We both plan some interventions, and then we do another one of these to see exactly where we're at.
Yeah, man, definitely. As soon as I get the kits, I want to be doing it, sending them off, get some clients on board, and then, let's have another talk and kind of go over the results. So that way we can use me as a guinea pig, so people will say, this is the data, this is what I'm on, this is what I'm doing, this is what it looks like. Maybe we can just have an open conversation and using myself, and then you and I will talk about what are some things that we can change based off the data that we have, and then I'll make those changes, and then we'll retest again so that we can prove real time what's kind of happening. So I think that could be really fun for people to watch that process.
Agreed. And the next time, obviously, you come back up to Lexington to say, hey, we'll take you through the lab and do a video about exactly how we do the benchtop diagnostic as well. And so, that sounds great, man. We'll get your kit to you, and then we'll start the process.
All right, man. Thank you for talking to me today. And if people who are watching this, subscribe and follow my channel as well, because Ryan and I are probably going to have quite a few more talks after this as this starts to develop and unfold. And I think it'll be great to watch. This is cutting edge. This is what's next. This is where we're going, and I'm really excited. So get out there and get optimized, everybody. And thank you for watching this. Like, share, and comment. Let's get this information out there. Thank you.